Nearly 8 months ago, my brother's bride stood in front of 160 wedding guests and called me broke. She did it less than 48 hours after I had charged $38,600 to my credit card to keep her wedding from falling apart. What Vanessa did not know was that I had already given the DJ a recording of her real voice, and I was waiting to see whether she would tell one final lie before I let the entire ballroom hear it. Before I tell you how one cruel joke exposed a secret involving my brother, my parents, and two identical payments, I hope you are doing well today. Stay with me, because the humiliation was only the beginning. And please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories about people who finally stop letting family use them. It was Saturday, December 13th, and cold wind pressed against the tall ballroom windows of the hotel in downtown Columbus. Inside, everything glowed gold. Crystal lights hung over white flowers. Champagne moved through the room on silver trays, and every table looked like it belonged in a wedding magazine. Vanessa had spent months trying to imitate. I was seated at the family table between my aunt and an empty chair that should have belonged to my father. He had disappeared 10 minutes earlier, and I assumed he was helping my mother with some last-minute problem. At that point, I still believed the worst thing waiting for me was an awkward conversation after the reception. Then a server placed my dinner in front of me. Everyone else at the table had beef tenderloin, roasted vegetables, an appetizer plate, and a dessert card tucked beside the wine glass. I received a shallow bowl of plain pasta with red sauce, the same simple meal the hotel provided for vendors working behind the scenes. There was no appetizer, no dessert, and no printed place card beside it. The server looked embarrassed. She lowered her voice and said the meal had been requested specifically for me. Before I could ask by whom, the music faded. Vanessa rose from the sweetheart table with a microphone in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other. Her white dress shimmered beneath the lights. She smiled at the room, then pointed directly at my bowl. "We saved the cheapest meal for her," she announced. "Dana is always reminding everyone to stay within a budget, so we thought she should lead by example." Nathan, my younger brother, stared at Vanessa as if he had missed the beginning of the conversation. Vanessa kept smiling. "She has given us plenty of financial advice," she continued, "but not $1 toward the wedding. Still, we wanted her to feel included." My face grew hot, but my hands stayed steady beneath the table. I had spent most of my career reviewing contracts, tracing purchase approvals, and asking questions people preferred not to answer. I knew the difference between being surprised and being unprepared. During cocktail hour, the banquet coordinator had quietly warned me that Vanessa had changed my dinner to a vendor meal and called it a family joke. My name was already listed on the reception schedule for a short toast as the groom's sister. I had gone to the DJ booth, handed the audio technician a brief recording, and told him it was part of my speech. I also gave him one clear instruction. He was not to play it unless I nodded after asking Vanessa a question. I had hoped I would never need to give that signal. I stood and picked up the microphone waiting at the edge of the family table. I did not mention the money. I did not call her a liar. I looked across the room at Vanessa and asked, "Are you sure?" For 1 second, the smile left her face. She glanced toward my mother. Linda gave her a small nod from the table near the dance floor. Vanessa lifted her chin. "I am completely sure. You did not contribute anything. You just showed up to judge the rest of us." That was the last opportunity I gave her. I looked toward the DJ booth and nodded. The ballroom speakers clicked softly, and Vanessa's voice filled the room. It was not the polished voice she used for clients or social media videos. She was crying so hard she had to stop between sentences. "Dana, please call me back. The final payment was returned, and the hotel says we have until noon tomorrow. Please put the remaining $38,600 on your card. I swear we will pay you back on Monday. Just do not let your brother find out before the rehearsal. He will cut everything or postpone the wedding." The recording ended. No music followed it. No one laughed. The silence was so complete that I heard a fork strike a plate 3 tables away. Nathan looked at Vanessa, then at me. "You paid the balance?" "Yes," I said. "Directly to the hotel on Thursday morning." My mother rose so quickly her chair scraped the floor. Turn that off, Dana. This is neither the time nor the place. The recording is already over, I replied. Vanessa gripped the microphone with both hands. That message is out of context. Dana offered to help. She wanted to make herself important. I opened my purse and removed the payment receipt I had printed that morning. Then I unlocked my phone and showed Nathan the message I had sent Vanessa immediately after paying. I had written that I was advancing the money directly to the venue and expected repayment by Monday. Vanessa's answer was beneath it. Yes, I promise. Thank you for saving us. Nathan read the exchange twice. His jaw tightened, but he did not raise his voice. Why did you tell me Mom and Dad covered the last payment? Vanessa looked toward my parents. My father had returned to the ballroom and now stood behind my mother's chair. He would not look at me. Linda stepped between the tables as if she could physically block the questions. Your sister has made her point. We can discuss family finances tomorrow without destroying the reception. I had heard some version of that sentence my entire life. Tomorrow meant after everyone had time to agree on the safest explanation. Tomorrow meant I would be asked to calm down, protect Nathan, spare my father's pride, and accept another promise with no date attached. This time, I did not sit down. Nathan pulled out his phone. There should not be anything left to discuss. I paid the money back yesterday. I thought I had misheard him. You paid whom? Mom and Dad. He opened his banking app and turned the screen toward me. Vanessa said they had covered the venue because the wedding account was short. I sent them the full amount Friday morning. The confirmation showed a same-day wire for $38,600. The memo beneath it read, Wedding balance reimbursement. I looked at the date on my hotel receipt. Thursday, December 11th. Then I looked at Nathan's wire. Friday, December 12th. I had paid the hotel. Nathan had replaced the money. Yet none of it had reached me. Nathan faced our mother. Mom, where did my money go? Linda said nothing. Her eyes moved toward my father. Mark swallowed and finally met my gaze. The money is not here anymore. That was the moment I understood Vanessa's cruelty was not the whole story. The wedding had not created the lie. It had only forced the first crack wide enough for me to see what my family had hidden behind it. The words were barely out of my father's mouth before the ballroom seemed to lose its rhythm. The DJ lowered the microphones and brought up a quiet instrumental track, but no one returned to eating. A few guests stood and drifted toward the bar. Most remained seated, whispering behind their hands while pretending not to watch us. Nathan looked from our father to our mother. What do you mean the money isn't here anymore? Vanessa reached for his arm. He stepped away before she touched him. The hotel's banquet manager appeared beside the sweetheart table and quietly suggested that we continue the discussion in a private conference room near the service corridor. Nathan agreed. I gathered my purse, my printed receipt, and my phone. Linda asked me to leave the phone behind. No, I said. I'm not deleting the recording, and I'm not handing over the proof. I did not ask you to delete anything, she replied, lowering her voice as several relatives watched us leave. I'm asking you to stop humiliating this family. I almost laughed. Vanessa had placed a staff meal in front of me and announced that I had contributed nothing. Yet somehow the humiliation belonged to everyone except me. The conference room had beige walls, a long laminate table, and no decorations except an emergency exit map. Nathan shut the door. Vanessa remained near it, as though she wanted a clear path back to the reception. She spoke first. Dana offered to help. She made it sound like it was no big deal. I unlocked my phone and opened our text thread. Read your answer. Vanessa looked at the screen, but did not take the phone. I read it aloud instead. I'm paying the venue directly. This is an advance, not a wedding gift. Repay me by Monday. Then I read her reply. Yes, I promise. Thank you for saving us. Linda sighed as if I were being deliberately difficult. No one is denying that you paid it temporarily. That is exactly what Vanessa denied in front of 160 people. It was a joke, Vanessa said. A joke requires everyone to know what is true. Her face tightened. Your mother told me Nathan had already sent the money to them. She said everything would be settled after the honeymoon. Nathan turned to Linda. You told her I had paid you? I told her there was no reason to panic, my mother said. The money passed through our account. That is all. Passed through to where? I asked. Mark lowered himself into a chair and rubbed one hand over his mouth. The bank may still be processing it. It was a same-day wire, I said. Nathan showed me the confirmation. It was available yesterday. My father stared at the table. Nathan's voice sharpened. Where did it go? Linda reached for her champagne glass before realizing she had left it in the ballroom. This is not a conversation we are having while our relatives are waiting outside. You used my sister's money, Nathan said. Then you took mine. I think that makes it a conversation we have now. Vanessa began crying again, but the tears had a different quality from the voicemail. In the recording, she had sounded terrified of losing the wedding. In that room, she sounded angry that the consequences had arrived during it. She pointed at Linda. You said you would fix this. You said Dana always made things dramatic, but she would calm down. My mother's expression changed. Do not put this entirely on me. You were the one who spent beyond the wedding account. Nathan flinched as if both women had struck him. Then he looked at me. I should have checked. Yes, I said. I thought Mom and Dad had covered the venue. Vanessa sent me their account information, and I wired the money. I should have asked for the receipt. Yes. His apology seemed to falter because I did not rush to soften it. I also should have listened when you warned me about the budget, he said. I called you controlling. You did. I'm sorry. I believe you are sorry. But being sorry does not mean I take over from here. His brow furrowed. I'm not asking you to. You have been asking me to without saying it since we were teenagers. You avoid the detail, someone lies to you, and then I become the person who has to find the paper trail. I will help establish where my money went. I will not manage your marriage or decide what you do about Vanessa. Vanessa stopped crying. There it is. You always have to be the smartest person in the room. No, I said. I just prefer knowing where $38,600 went. Linda stepped closer to Nathan. Go back to your guests. We will discuss this tomorrow. Do not destroy your wedding over a financial misunderstanding. Nathan looked through the narrow window in the door at the moving shadows in the corridor. I could see the conflict on his face. He had spent more than a year planning that evening. People had traveled, booked rooms, bought clothes, and rearranged their holidays. Part of him still wanted to walk back into the ballroom, cut the cake, and pretend he could postpone the truth until morning. I understood that impulse. I had spent years postponing truths for the same family. I'm leaving, I said. Nathan looked alarmed. Dana, wait. I'm not storming out. I'm removing myself from a situation where everyone expects me to absorb the damage so the party can continue. We will meet tomorrow morning. Bring the wire confirmation and the wedding account records. Linda said my name in the warning tone she had used since I was a child. I put the receipt back into my purse. I paid the venue. Nathan paid you. Until someone tells me where the second payment went, I have nothing else to discuss tonight. I walked back through the ballroom to collect my coat. The vendor pasta was still cooling at my seat. My aunt squeezed my hand but did not ask me to stay. Across the room, guests looked away when I met their eyes. The drive to my apartment normally took about 20 minutes. That night, cold rain spotted the windshield, and the lights along the interstate blurred at the edges. I was angry enough to call an attorney, my bank, and every relative who had laughed. Instead, I waited at a red light, opened the voice recorder on my phone, and dictated the sequence while it was fresh. Wednesday afternoon, Vanessa left the voicemail. Thursday morning, I verified the returned payment and paid the hotel. Friday morning, Nathan wired the same amount to our parents. Saturday night, my father admitted the money was gone. At home, I exported the original voicemail, instead of relying on the copy I had sent to the DJ. I saved the hotel invoice, the card receipt, Vanessa's promise to repay me, and screenshots of the messages with their dates visible. I placed everything in a folder and backed it up twice. I did not contact a lawyer that night. I knew enough from compliance work to understand that anger was useful for noticing risk and terrible for deciding what to do with it. Just after 11, Nathan texted that he had sent a written request to the banquet coordinator. His name was on the hotel contract, so he had asked for the banquet event order and the change history connected to our reception. I replied that he should forward only records he had the right to receive and keep the original email intact. At 12:19, a message from Nathan appeared in my inbox. The hotel had responded quickly because the reception was still underway and the coordinator was on site. Nathan forwarded the relevant pages without editing them. The banquet event order listed my original entree beside my name. A change had been submitted Friday afternoon, hours after Nathan wired the money to our parents. Vanessa had asked that my dinner be replaced with a vendor meal. The coordinator had written, "Please confirm, this is not a seating or dietary error. Miss Miller is listed at the family table and as a scheduled speaker." Vanessa's reply appeared beneath it. "No, she keeps treating this wedding like an audit. Let her laugh with everyone else for once. It's a family joke." I read the timestamp 3 times. Vanessa had not humiliated me because she panicked when the microphone entered her hand. She had planned it the day before, after Nathan had already replaced the money. She knew he believed our parents had rescued the wedding. She knew I was still carrying the charge. And instead of using the reception to thank me or tell the truth, she had arranged a cheaper plate so the entire room could laugh while she erased what I had done. Below the forwarded email, Nathan had written one sentence. If she planned this yesterday, what else did all of them plan? I looked again at Vanessa's words. She had called it a joke. On its own, perhaps someone could have believed her. Beside the voicemail, the receipt, and the missing wire, it read like the first written piece of a much larger lie. By Sunday morning, the humiliation at the wedding had already become secondary to the money. Vanessa had planned the joke, but a joke had not moved $38,600 out of my reach. People had. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee, going cold beside me, and built a folder the same way I would prepare for an internal review at work. I saved the original voicemail with its metadata. I downloaded the hotel invoice, the card receipt, the returned payment notice Nathan had received from the venue, and every message between Vanessa and me. I named each file by date and time, then backed the folder up to an encrypted drive and a second cloud account. After that, I called my card issuer. The representative confirmed that the hotel charge had cleared in full. She also confirmed the interest rate that would apply if I carried the balance beyond the billing cycle. I wrote the number down and calculated what Vanessa's promise could cost me if Monday came and went without repayment. The answer made my stomach tighten. I could cover the charge for a short period without missing rent or touching retirement savings, but that did not make it harmless. I had spent years building excellent credit and a strong emergency reserve. My family had treated both as if they were shared property. That morning, I also removed the emergency card my parents had been authorized to use from my account. I had given it to them 2 years earlier, after my father's hospital stay, with a clear rule that it was for medical or household emergencies only. They had not used that card for the wedding, but I no longer trusted access that depended entirely on goodwill. I canceled the authorized card and removed my payment information from the utility portals I personally funded for them. I did not touch any account that belonged to my parents. I only closed the doors that had my name on them. Nathan arrived shortly before noon carrying his laptop and a thick wedding binder Vanessa had left in their hotel suite. He looked as if he had not slept. He set the binder on my table and opened his banking account before taking off his coat. "I brought everything I could access without going into her private accounts," he said. "That is all I want." He showed me the same-day wire confirmation again, this time as a downloaded bank document rather than a phone screenshot. The source was his wedding savings account, not a loan or credit line. He had wired the money at 9:23 Friday morning to an account jointly held by Linda and Mark Miller. The memo read, "Wedding balance reimbursement." I compared it with my hotel receipt. My payment had cleared Thursday at 10:14 in the morning. Nathan's wire reached our parents the following day. There was no weekend delay, no pending transfer, and no confusion about the amount. The same figure appeared in both documents down to the last dollar. Nathan opened the wedding spreadsheet. Vanessa told me Mom and Dad covered the shortage when the hotel payment was returned. She said I needed to replace their money before the reception. Did she show you a receipt from them? No. Did Mom or Dad ask you directly for reimbursement? No. Then why did you send it? He stared at the spreadsheet. Because I wanted the problem gone. That was the most honest answer he had given me. He had not been tricked by a sophisticated financial scheme. He had accepted the first explanation that allowed him to stop asking questions. Vanessa had used that weakness, and our parents had benefited from it. We called Linda together. She answered on the fourth ring and immediately said she was exhausted. Nathan asked where his wire had gone. The money is tied up, she said. Tied up where? I asked. In family obligations. That is not an account, she exhaled sharply. Dana, you are behaving as if we stole from you. You accepted money Nathan sent to reimburse a charge on my card. I have not received it. Tell me where it went. Mark's voice came faintly through the speaker. The lender had a deadline. Then the line went silent. Nathan leaned closer to the phone. What lender? Linda spoke over him. Your father is confused. This has been a terrible weekend. I am not confused, Mark said, but he sounded farther away now. I looked at the documents spread across my table. By noon tomorrow, I need either proof that the money is still available or a written proposal explaining how and when I will be repaid. Linda gave a short, disbelieving laugh. A written proposal? To your own parents? Yes. You are turning a family matter into a business transaction. You did that when you spent money meant to repay my credit card. She said I was cruel, ungrateful, and more concerned with paperwork than with what my parents might be facing. She did not say the money was still in their account. Nathan ended the call after confirming that we would be at their house Monday morning. The drive from my apartment to my parents' home took about 25 minutes. The sky was low and gray, and old snow had hardened along the edges of the road. Neither Nathan nor I said much. He kept checking his phone, but Vanessa had stopped calling him after he told her he needed space. Linda opened the door before we knocked. She did not hug either of us. The house looked exactly as it had the week before, which somehow made the situation worse. The Christmas tree stood beside the front window. My father's restored Corvette was visible through the garage door window. Family photographs covered the hallway, including one from a summer weekend at the cabin Linda had spent years calling our legacy. On the kitchen counter sat a certified envelope from their mortgage servicer. I saw the sender's name but did not touch it. Nathan pointed to the envelope. Is that what Dad meant by the lender? Linda moved it toward herself. That is private. Then explain the money without opening it, I said. Mark entered from the living room, carrying 2 pages. His shoulders seemed lower than they had at the wedding. He placed the pages in front of us. This is a summary, he said. Not the full statement. It showed a home equity loan, several missed payments, late charges, and an amount required to cure the delinquency. The payment posted Friday afternoon, only hours after Nathan's wire arrived. $38,600 had not disappeared. It had gone exactly where my father had sent it. You used all of it? Nathan asked. Mark nodded. The lender had already sent notices. If we missed the cure deadline, they could move to the next stage. Linda folded her arms. We were protecting the house. With money that was supposed to repay Dana, Nathan said. We planned to replace it. How? Linda looked at Mark. Mark tapped the second page. Near the bottom was a maturity date in the spring. I recognized the term, but the summary did not show the full amount due at maturity. What happens on that date? I asked. We are working on it, Linda said. That was not my question. Mark rubbed his forehead. There may be a larger balance due. How large? I do not have the exact figure in front of me. I believed he did not want to say it, but I could not prove that yet. What I could prove was simpler. They had used Nathan's wire to stop an immediate lender action, but the payment had not solved the underlying debt. Linda began talking about the years they had spent building the house, the family gatherings, and how devastating it would have been for neighbors to learn they were in trouble. She described the payment as temporary borrowing, as if intention changed the fact that no one had asked me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the county property records I had checked that morning. The records confirmed that my parents still owned the cabin near Hocking Hills. I did not know its current market value, and I did not pretend to. I also did not know what my father's Corvette would bring if sold. But I knew they had assets. You had other options, I said. You could have told Nathan the truth. You could have asked me for a documented loan. You could have discussed selling something. Linda's face hardened. The cabin is not something. It belongs to this family. So did my financial security. You can recover from a credit card balance. Once we sell the cabin, that tradition is gone. There it was. Not desperation. Priority. They had decided that I could carry the debt because my credit was strong, my job was stable, and I had always found a way through. The cabin, the Corvette, the house, and the image of our family had all ranked above asking for my consent. I closed the laptop. I want a written repayment proposal. Linda stared at me as if I had spoken in another language. You are not putting a contract between us. Then, you are telling me your plan depends on me trusting people who already spent the money. Mark looked down at the statement. He did not deny it. We left my parents' house without a repayment plan. Linda remained beside the kitchen counter, guarding the lender envelope as if privacy were the problem. Mark followed us to the front door, but did not ask us to stay. By the time Nathan and I reached my apartment, he had stopped defending anyone. He opened his laptop at my dining table and pulled up the password manager attached to his personal account. The wedding planning inbox had been created under both his and Vanessa's names, but Vanessa had managed it from the beginning. Nathan had never logged in after the first week. I gave her the vendor list and told her to handle it, he said. She said too many people asking questions would confuse everyone. That should have bothered you. It did. I decided being bothered was easier than having another argument. He entered his credentials and stared at the number of unread conversations. There were hundreds of emails from the hotel, florist, photographer, rental company, musicians, and event stylists. I told him not to hand me the laptop. You own the account, I said. You search it. Export only the threads connected to the venue payment, the reception changes, and anything mentioning me. We do not need her private conversations. Nathan nodded. Earlier that morning, I had scheduled a consultation with a civil attorney through the legal benefits program offered by my employer. Until the attorney reviewed the situation, I wanted every document preserved in its original form. Nathan exported the relevant threads as complete files, saved the attachments separately, and forwarded copies to me without changing the subject lines or timestamps. The first emails did not reveal a conspiracy. They revealed something more ordinary and, in some ways, more frustrating. The wedding had not reached $118,600 because of one catastrophic expense. Vanessa had pushed the cost upward through dozens of additions. She upgraded the chairs, added custom linens, expanded the floral installation, changed the lighting package, ordered a second dessert station, and hired a content team to produce short social media videos during the reception. Each change looked manageable when viewed alone. The trouble appeared when we read them together. A hotel coordinator warned that the ballroom package was already above the approved budget. Vanessa replied that the wedding needed to feel intentional and elevated. When the florist raised the cost of the ceremony arch, Linda answered that they would make it work. When the photographer requested an additional deposit, Linda again wrote that they would make it work. Nathan had been copied on many of those messages. He clicked through them slowly. Some had never been opened. Others had been marked as read within minutes, although he could not remember reading them. I probably cleared the notifications on my phone, he said. I thought Vanessa and Mom had it under control. They did have it under control, I replied. Just not in the way you assumed. He leaned back and covered his eyes with one hand. You warned me. 6 months before the wedding, I had reviewed the first version of their vendor spreadsheet because Nathan asked me to check a cancellation clause. I noticed the totals climbing and told him they were spending money to perform a marriage instead of preparing for one. I had believed the statement was accurate. I still did, but accuracy did not excuse the way I delivered it. I should not have said it like that, I admitted. You were excited, And I spoke to you as if you were an employee who had ignored a policy. You made me feel stupid. I know. Vanessa said you wanted the wedding to fail so you could prove you were right. I did not want it to fail. But I was angry that you asked for my advice and then treated every answer you disliked as criticism. He lowered his hand. So she was not lying about everything. No. The most effective lies usually contain one useful piece of truth. Vanessa had not invented my bluntness. She had converted it into a motive. Because I had spoken harshly once, she could portray every later question as another attempt to control Nathan. Linda had helped reinforce that image, because it served her too. Nathan searched my name in the wedding inbox. The first results were harmless. Seating notes, dietary information, my scheduled toast. A reminder that I would arrive alone. Then he found an email from Thursday afternoon, several hours after I had paid the venue. Linda had written to Vanessa, "Keep the reception light. If Dana corners Nathan, this will turn into another lecture, and he has enough pressure before the ceremony." Vanessa replied, "I can handle the toast. He does not need another money talk before the wedding." On their own, the messages could have sounded protective. Linda could claim she wanted Nathan calm. Vanessa could claim she wanted one evening without conflict. Neither sentence admitted that I had paid the venue or that Nathan had been given a false explanation. But the timing mattered. By then, Vanessa had promised to repay me. She also knew I had told her to speak to Nathan before the rehearsal dinner. "She knew you were trying to talk to me," Nathan said. "Yes, and Mom knew too, at least by Thursday afternoon." Nathan searched for the phrase, "money talk." Another email appeared from Friday morning, shortly after his wire had been sent. Vanessa wrote, "Nathan thinks you and Mark covered the venue, so he sent the reimbursement. I told him it was handled." Linda replied, "Then do not let Dana correct him before the reception. We will settle everything after the weekend." Nathan read the exchange without moving. There was no mention of the mortgage lender. No explanation that the money would be unavailable by Friday afternoon. Linda described the situation as something they could settle later, even though she and Mark were preparing to use the wire that same day. Vanessa answered, "I will keep Dana away from him. She already thinks this wedding is a financial disaster, and I am not letting her ruin the mood." A few hours later, she emailed the banquet coordinator about my meal. The coordinator asked whether replacing my entree with a vendor plate was a mistake because I was seated at the family table and listed as a speaker. Vanessa confirmed the change. Nathan closed the message and looked toward the window. "She needed everyone to think you were bitter." I had already reached the same conclusion, but hearing him say it made the design of the evening clearer. Vanessa had not merely wanted to embarrass me because she disliked me. Linda had not merely wanted to postpone an uncomfortable discussion. They needed a version of me that no one would trust. If I questioned the missing money after the wedding, Vanessa could say I was jealous of her. Linda could say I had spent months criticizing the ceremony. Nathan could remember the room laughing at the broke, controlling older sister, and wonder whether I was exaggerating to regain attention. The vendor meal was not revenge for one rude comment, it was preparation. Nathan's passivity had made that preparation possible. He had ignored the vendor emails, accepted Vanessa's account information, wired the money without requesting a receipt, and assumed every detail would somehow resolve itself. Vanessa and Linda did not need to forge his approval. They only needed to keep him comfortable enough not to inspect what he had already approved. "I gave them the empty space," he said quietly. "They filled it with whatever story they needed." I did not reassure him. He needed to understand his role without turning his guilt into another problem for me to manage. We continued through the exported threads until Nathan found an email sent at 4:17 Friday afternoon. By then, his wire had reached our parents' account. The lender payment had either been submitted or was about to be submitted. Vanessa had already confirmed my vendor meal. She wrote, "He already wired you. Please make sure Dana does not turn this into a scene before the toast." Linda replied, 2 minutes later. After the weekend, I stared at those 3 words. Linda had not said the money was safe. She had not said they would ask my permission. She had not even said they would repay me on Monday. She only wanted me delayed. By the time the weekend ended, the money would be sitting with the lender, the reception would be over, and my parents would present the debt as an irreversible family emergency. Vanessa would have publicly reduced me to a jealous woman complaining about money after being welcomed to an expensive wedding. They had counted on shame doing what a locked account could not. They had expected it to keep me from asking quickly enough to stop them. The email from Friday afternoon changed the question I was asking. I no longer wanted to know whether Vanessa, Linda, and Mark had lied. The documents had already answered that. I wanted to know what version of the lie each of them would choose when they could not coordinate their answers in real time. A few days later, I met with a civil attorney through the legal benefits program offered by my employer. I brought a clean timeline, not a speech about betrayal. I gave her the hotel invoice, my card receipt, Vanessa's voicemail, her written promise to repay me, Nathan's wire confirmation, the banquet event order, and the emails from the wedding inbox. The attorney did not promise that one letter would force everyone to pay me. She explained that Vanessa's written agreement created the clearest direct claim because she had asked me to advance the money and had personally promised repayment. Nathan had a separate issue with our parents because he had wired them money for a specific purpose, and they had used it for something else. Before discussing a lawsuit, she recommended a pre-suit settlement request. Each person would receive the same factual questions and would be asked to provide a written timeline. It was not a police interrogation, and no one was being accused of a crime. The goal was to preserve their explanations before they could change them repeatedly. The questions were simple. When did you first learn that the venue payment had been returned? Who asked Dana to make the replacement payment? When did you learn that Nathan planned to send the reimbursement? What did you understand the wire was intended to repay? When did you learn the money would be paid to the lender? Who requested the vendor meal? What did you expect to happen after the wedding? Vanessa called me less than an hour after receiving the request. "This is insane," she said. "You are treating us like defendants. You were invited to explain your actions in writing. I can explain them to you now. I want the same version tomorrow that you give me today." She accused me of hiding behind a lawyer because I could not handle a family conversation. I reminded her that the family conversation had begun with her announcing a lie into a microphone. She ended the call without answering a single question. All 3 written timelines arrived within the week. Each person believed the safest strategy was to separate themselves from the decision that looked worst and place it on someone else. Vanessa's version was the longest. She admitted that she had asked me to pay the venue and had promised repayment by Monday. She claimed Linda had assured her that Nathan's wire would replace my money after the wedding. According to Vanessa, she did not know the exact amount of the lender payment and had assumed my parents were only borrowing the wire for a few days. She described the vendor meal as a joke that Linda had encouraged because I had been tense and critical about the wedding. Vanessa said she believed teasing me would lighten the mood. She did not explain why lightening the mood required telling 160 guests that I had contributed nothing. She also wrote that she had never intended to harm me financially. That sentence appeared twice, as though repetition could substitute for evidence. Linda's timeline contradicted Vanessa almost immediately. My mother claimed Vanessa had described my payment as general family help rather than a loan. She said she believed I had offered to carry the balance temporarily because I wanted Nathan's wedding to succeed. That explanation failed against my text message requiring repayment by Monday, but Linda did not address the message directly. She blamed Mark for submitting the lender payment. She wrote that he handled the home equity loan, knew the deadline, and made the final decision to use Nathan's wire. Her own role, she claimed, had been limited to keeping Nathan calm before the ceremony. Regarding the vendor meal, Linda said Vanessa had mentioned a harmless joke, but had not explained what she planned to say. My mother insisted she never expected Vanessa to call me broke. The emails showed Linda nodding Vanessa toward silence, but they did not contain a sentence ordering the insult. That gave her just enough space to pretend she had been standing near the fire without knowing who held the match. Mark's timeline was the shortest. He said Linda managed their household account and informed him that Nathan had sent money to help the family. He admitted making the lender payment, but claimed he did not understand that the wire was specifically intended to reimburse me. That explanation might have survived if Nathan had transferred a random amount. He had not. The wire was for exactly $38,600. The memo read, "Wedding balance reimbursement." The amount matched my hotel charge to the dollar. Mark never explained why he believed Nathan had selected that precise figure as a general gift. I printed all 3 timelines and placed them side by side on my dining table. Nathan sat across from me with a yellow legal pad. He looked older than he had 2 weeks earlier, not physically, but in the way people do when they stop expecting someone else to protect them from what they already know. "Vanessa says Mom promised to repay you," he said. "Mom says Vanessa told her it was family help. Dad says he did not know it had anything to do with you. They cannot all be true. None of them are completely true. That is more likely." The lawyer had also checked public property records. Those records did not reveal private payment history or delinquency details, but they established several facts. The home equity lien had existed for months before the wedding. My parents still owned the main house. They also owned the cabin near Hocking Hills, and no new mortgage or lien appeared against it. The debt was not a crisis that had materialized after Nathan's wire arrived. The risk had been building for months. My parents had not suddenly discovered on Friday that they needed money. They had been waiting for a source of money they could use, without immediately giving up an asset or admitting the truth. Through the attorney, we requested the relevant lender statements. Linda and Mark delayed. First, they said the statements were difficult to retrieve. Then, Mark claimed the online account was locked. Linda said they needed time to review private information before sharing it. The delay told me that the $38,600 cure payment was not the most dangerous number in those documents. While refusing the lender statements, Linda tried to prove that Vanessa had pressured her. She forwarded the attorney a text thread between them from the week before the wedding. She did it deliberately, believing it would make her look like a frightened mother being manipulated by a demanding bride. Vanessa had complained that I would expose the returned payment and embarrass her before Nathan. Linda responded that I was angry because I liked being necessary. She wrote that the family should avoid giving me an audience until the weekend was over. Then came the sentence Linda apparently believed would help her. "Dana will be upset, but she always gets over it. By summer, she will be helping with something else." I read it once, then again. My mother had not expected forgiveness because she believed her actions were harmless. She expected forgiveness because she believed my role in the family was permanent. I could become angry. I could withdraw for a few weeks. But eventually, another bill, contract, medical form, or emergency would appear, and I would return because I had always been the person who knew how to fix things. In her mind, my competence guaranteed her protection from consequences. The forwarded thread also destroyed Linda's claim that she had misunderstood my payment as casual family help. Vanessa had written that I expected the money back Monday and might tell Nathan before the reception. Linda answered that Monday would give everyone time to figure out the house situation. She knew the repayment date. She knew there was a problem involving the house. She knew the wire was about to replace my money. She simply decided my deadline was less important than hers. Nathan stood and walked to the window. They were waiting for my savings. "Not necessarily your savings specifically," I said. They were waiting for any money large enough to postpone the lender problem without selling anything. And when Vanessa needed the venue payment, they saw a way to move the same amount twice. They saw a way to use my credit first and your cash second. He turned back. "Do you think they planned the returned payment?" "No. There is no evidence of that. Vanessa overspent, and the wedding account came up short. The opportunity came afterward." That distinction mattered to me. I would not make the story worse than the evidence supported. Their choices were already enough. I began marking the 3 timelines. Beside each statement, I wrote the document that confirmed or contradicted it. Vanessa's promise was contradicted by the vendor meal and her continued lies. Linda's claim of ignorance was contradicted by the forwarded texts and wedding emails. Mark's claim that he misunderstood the wire was contradicted by the exact amount and memo. By midnight, almost every important sentence had been tested. Only one gap remained. Mark had admitted using the wire to cure the delinquency, but neither he nor Linda had disclosed the full balance due when the home equity loan reached maturity. The partial statement he had shown us listed a spring date without the final amount. The cure payment had bought them time. It had not solved the loan. I circled the blank space on Mark's timeline and wrote one question beside it. What happens in the spring? For the first time since the wedding, I stopped wondering which one of them was telling the truth. I began wondering what number was frightening enough that all three of them preferred to destroy my credibility rather than let Nathan see it. The question about spring stayed at the top of my notes, but my attorney told me not to chase every hidden debt before protecting the one already attached to my name. The card balance was mine. The interest was accumulating against my credit. Whatever else my parents had concealed could wait until we had a formal path forward. At our next meeting, she laid out the problem in language even my family would not be able to blur. Vanessa had made the clearest promise to me. She asked me to pay the hotel, acknowledged that the payment was in advance, and agreed to repay me by Monday. That gave me a strong direct claim against her for the original amount and the financial harm caused by her failure to pay. Nathan's position was different. He had wired money to Linda and Mark because he believed they had covered the venue. His memo identified the payment as a wedding balance reimbursement. My parents had accepted the money and used it for their home equity loan instead. That gives Nathan his own claim against them, my attorney explained. But we do not want three people paying you the same principal or anyone later claiming you collected twice. Nathan had already agreed to cooperate. He signed a written direction stating that his wire had been intended to reimburse the charge on my card. He authorized any settlement funds recovered from our parents up to that principal amount to be paid directly to me. He also agreed that once I received the $38,600, he would not pursue Linda and Mark for the same sum. The document did not erase his responsibility. It clarified it. I had covered the venue. Nathan had attempted to replace my money. Our parents had diverted his payment. The settlement would put the principal where it had been meant to go, without allowing anyone to recover the same loss twice. My attorney then helped me set the demand. I wanted one principal amount, not three. I wanted the actual interest charged to my card and the reasonable legal costs required to recover the money. I did not ask for an invented punishment figure. I did not ask for emotional damages, because my relatives had laughed at me. I wanted the financial position I would have occupied if Vanessa, Linda, and Mark had kept their promises. The proposed allocation reflected what each person had done. My parents would repay the principal from the proceeds of selling the cabin. Vanessa would cover the actual card interest and an agreed portion of my legal fees because she had directly requested the payment, promised repayment, concealed the truth from Nathan, and then tried to destroy my credibility. If they refused, the claims could proceed separately. The settlement was their opportunity to avoid that. The demand letters went out on a Thursday morning. Vanessa, Linda, and Mark each received a separate letter. Nathan received copies because his written direction was part of the proposal. That same day, I finished separating my finances from my family. The emergency card I had once given my parents had already been canceled. I removed my stored payment information from the accounts I personally funded and changed the passwords on every service under my name. I did not touch their checking account. I did not cancel utilities in their names. I did not interfere with the house, the cabin, or the lender. I only stopped giving them access to resources that belonged to me. Linda called before lunch. "I cannot believe you sent legal threats to your own parents," she said. "The letter offers a settlement. It says we have a deadline. You had deadlines when you used my money. The hotel had one, the lender had one, Monday was mine, and none of you respected it. A lawyer is going to destroy this family." The lawyer did not take the money. She became quiet for a moment, then changed direction. She reminded me that she had cared for me when I was sick, helped me through college, and opened her home whenever I needed it. She listed motherhood as if it were a line of credit she could collect $38,600 from whenever she chose. "I am not denying what you did for me," I said. I am refusing to let it become permission to take from me. You always make everything so cold. No. I made this clear. There is a difference. She ended the call after saying I would regret choosing paperwork over family. I did not call her back. Mark tried a quieter approach. He emailed a proposal to pay me $500 a month beginning in February. There was no down payment, no security, and no explanation for what would happen when the home equity loan matured in spring. At that rate, the principal alone would take more than 6 years to repay. My card interest would continue immediately, while his promise depended on a financial future he had already refused to disclose. I declined. He called and said $500 was all they could manage, without selling something important. The cabin is important, I said. So is the Corvette, so is the house. You decided my credit was the least important asset available. That is not fair. It is exactly what happened. He asked whether I would accept the monthly payments if he added a personal promise that the amount would increase after spring. No. Why not? Because you still will not tell me what happens in spring. He did not answer. Vanessa contacted me that evening. Unlike my parents, she did not begin with love or family duty. She began with her reputation. Relatives had been calling her. Several guests had asked Nathan what they heard in the ballroom. She had postponed posting wedding photographs because every congratulatory comment felt like an invitation for someone to mention the recording. She wanted me to release a statement. Her draft said the voicemail had been played without context, that I had voluntarily offered temporary help, and that our family had resolved the issue privately. She promised that if I posted it, she would persuade Linda to sell the cabin and cooperate with repayment. You are asking me to trade a lie for my own money, I said. I am asking you to stop making this uglier than it needs to be. I have not posted anything. You played the recording in front of everyone. After you used a microphone to lie about me. She said the wedding had been the most important day of her life, and that one mistake should not define her. The vendor meal was requested the day before, I reminded her. The emails were sent before that. The voicemail came before both. Which part was the one mistake? She began crying, and said Linda had pushed her to keep me away from Nathan. She claimed my mother had encouraged the joke because everyone was tired of me acting superior. If Linda planned it, I said, send the evidence to my attorney. Vanessa stopped crying. You would reduce what I owe? No, but the evidence will show what actually happened. She did not like that answer. She wanted disclosure to function as a bargain. I wanted it to function as truth. Before hanging up, she warned me that she could tell people things about Linda that would permanently damage Nathan's relationship with his parents. That is your decision, I said. I am not recruiting you to attack anyone. You do not care what happens to this family. I care enough not to lie for it anymore. The first screenshots reached my attorney the following morning. Vanessa had sent them herself. The messages showed Linda describing me as controlling, urging Vanessa to keep Nathan occupied, and predicting that I would eventually forgive everyone because I always did. One message suggested that if I raised the money issue after the wedding, Vanessa should remind Nathan how critical I had been during planning. Vanessa believed those screenshots would transfer most of the blame to Linda. Several hours later, Linda responded in kind. She forwarded the full venue thread showing that Vanessa had personally requested the vendor meal, rejected the coordinator's concern, and chosen the wording, family joke. Linda also provided messages in which Vanessa complained that the wedding had to appear more expensive than her cousin's, and said Nathan would forgive the overspending once he saw the finished ballroom. Linda believed those emails would prove Vanessa was the true manipulator. Neither woman had sent anything by accident. Each one chose documents that harmed the other and minimized her own role. Each believed that if she helped me identify the greater villain, I might excuse the smaller one. Instead, their submissions filled gaps in the same evidence matrix. Vanessa proved Linda had helped build the false story about me. Linda proved Vanessa had designed the public humiliation and had motives beyond panic. They were no longer protecting the shared lie because the formal demand had given the lie a price. Once I stopped mediating their fear, they began spending one another to save themselves. Late that afternoon, my phone vibrated with a message from Mark. He did not copy Linda, Nathan, Vanessa, or my attorney. He asked to meet me alone, at a diner near the law office. Then a second message appeared. The cure payment was not the end. There is a maturity balance your mother has not told Nathan. Mark was already sitting in a back booth when I arrived at the diner. He had chosen a table far from the windows and ordered coffee he had not touched. The restaurant was 15 minutes from my office and only a few blocks from my attorney's building, which meant I could leave the moment he tried to turn the meeting into another private family bargain. I placed my phone face down on the table. My attorney knows I'm here. Anything related to repayment still goes through her. His mouth tightened. I'm not trying to go around your lawyer. You asked to meet alone. Because your mother cannot know I gave you this yet. He slid a thick envelope toward me. I did not open it immediately. What are you expecting in return? Mark looked down at his coffee. I want you to understand how this started. That is not an answer. I'm not asking you to forgive the money. You are asking for something, or you would have sent the documents to the attorney. After a long silence, he admitted he wanted me to see that Linda had made the final decision to use Nathan's wire. He wanted me to distinguish between the person who had caused the financial crisis and the person who had chosen the solution. The distinction did not help him as much as he expected. Mark told me that 2 years earlier, an old friend had offered him a chance to invest in a franchise location outside Columbus. The projections promised steady income, limited involvement, and a quick return. Mark had borrowed against the house through a home equity loan without telling Linda the full amount. The franchise never opened. Permits were delayed, costs increased, and the operating partner withdrew. By the time Mark accepted that the investment was failing, much of the money had already been spent. He kept making payments and telling Linda the household budget was tight because of taxes and repairs. When did she learn the truth? I asked. When the default notice came. How long before the wedding? About 4 months. Linda had not created the debt, but she had helped hide it after discovering it. They cut expenses quietly, moved money between accounts, and delayed payments while hoping Mark could recover part of the investment. They did not tell Nathan because his wedding was approaching. They did not tell me because they believed I would insist on selling the cabin immediately. You knew what I would recommend, I said. Yes. And you knew it was probably the only realistic option. He stared at the untouched coffee. The cabin was supposed to stay in the family. So was honesty. He pushed the envelope closer. The payment from Nathan only cured the delinquency. It did not pay off the loan. Inside was the most recent lender statement and a letter from the loan servicer. The documents had been provided voluntarily, so I photographed the pages and sent copies to my attorney while Mark sat across from me. The maturity date I had noticed earlier appeared again, but this time the balance was visible. A large portion of the principal would become due in the spring. Even after using Nathan's wire to cure the missed payments and fees, my parents still faced a sum they could not cover from regular income. You were going to lose the house anyway, I said. Not necessarily. We hoped to refinance. With missed payments, another lien, and declining income, we were exploring options. The phrase sounded exactly like every corporate answer I had ever heard when no viable option existed. The cabin had enough equity to cover my principal and reduce the remaining home equity balance. The Corvette could provide additional cash. Selling the main house and downsizing would solve more. My parents had known those choices existed, but each one required them to admit publicly that their lifestyle had been built on debt. Using my credit required only one thing: confidence that I would absorb the consequences quietly. Mark tried to redirect the blame. He said Linda had suggested using Nathan's reimbursement when Vanessa told her he planned to send it. He said he had objected at first. He said Linda insisted they could replace the money after the holidays, once they knew whether refinancing was possible. Did you know the money was intended to repay me? I asked. I knew there had been a venue problem. That was not my question. He rubbed both palms over his face. I knew you had put something on your card. Did you know I had not been repaid? Yes. Did you know Nathan believed his wire would replace the payment I made? I knew that was part of it. There is no part of it. The memo said wedding balance reimbursement. I thought Linda would fix it later. You submitted the lender payment because the deadline was that afternoon. So, when the deadlines competed, You chose yours. His shoulders dropped. Yes. Mark insisted he had known nothing about the vendor meal. I believed that was possible because no evidence connected him to Vanessa's public stunt. But ignorance of the humiliation did not make him innocent of the financial betrayal. He unlocked his phone and opened a text thread with Linda. I want you to see that she was directing this, he said. I did not take the phone. He placed it on the table between us and scrolled to the Friday exchange himself. Linda had written that Nathan's wire had arrived and that Mark needed to submit the cure payment before the lender's cutoff. Mark asked whether Dana had been told. Linda replied that Vanessa would keep me occupied until after the reception. Then I saw Mark's answer. Dana will be angry, but she always comes around. He stopped scrolling when he realized I had read it. That was not meant the way it sounds. How was it meant? I meant you love this family. You have always understood that people make mistakes. No, you meant my anger had an expiration date. He tried to explain that I was stronger than Nathan, more practical than Linda, and better with money than he had ever been. Each compliment carried the same hidden demand. Because I could survive being used, they had decided using me was less damaging than surrendering something they valued. You did not stay silent because Mom controlled you, I said. You stayed silent because her plan protected your house and your reputation. Mark looked older than 64 then. For years, I had mistaken his avoidance for softness. He rarely shouted. He rarely issued demands. He let Linda speak first, and then acted as though her louder voice made his agreement meaningless. The text thread ended that illusion. I will send the complete thread to your attorney, he said. You should send the lender documents too. Will it change what you are demanding from me? No. His expression hardened with disappointment. He had expected confession to function like payment. He believed that giving me Linda's words would purchase a reduction in his own responsibility. I came here voluntarily, he reminded me. You also made the lender payment voluntarily. I left the diner with the documents, but I did not feel triumphant. Mark had confirmed the worst part of the pattern. He had known I was carrying the debt, known Nathan's wire had a specific purpose, and known Linda's plan depended on delaying me. He participated because he believed I would eventually return to being useful. That evening, Nathan called. He told me he had confronted Vanessa at the hotel after reviewing the full wedding account and asking her for complete disclosure of her personal debts. She refused to provide it and accused him of allowing me to audit their marriage. I was not present for the conversation, so I asked Nathan to send me only what could be documented. A few minutes later, I received the email he had sent Vanessa, confirming that he was moving out, canceling the honeymoon, and requesting preservation of all financial records connected to the wedding. He also forwarded her written response, refusing full disclosure, unless he first promised not to share anything with me or his attorney. Nathan had booked a room with a friend and scheduled a consultation with a divorce lawyer. He did not ask me whether he should leave her. I kept waiting for someone else to tell me what was true, he said. I'm done doing that. Then make your decisions based on what you can verify. I filed the separation notice in writing because I knew you would say that. I would have. The next morning, Vanessa texted me. Linda had refused to meet with her, and Vanessa claimed my mother was preparing to blame the entire plan on her. She offered to cooperate with me if I helped prove Linda had manipulated both of us. I answered that she could send any relevant evidence to my attorney. I would not form a new alliance with one person who had betrayed me simply because another person had stopped protecting her. By the end of the week, Mark had turned against Linda. Linda had turned against Vanessa, and Vanessa was asking me to help her fight my parents. Nathan had stepped out of his marriage instead of asking me to rescue it. Then my attorney called. Vanessa, Linda, and Mark had all agreed to attend a settlement conference. They each think they can make the other two carry the loss, she said. I looked at the 3 written timelines spread across my table. For the first time, everyone who had relied on my silence would have to sit in the same room with the records. They were coming to sacrifice one another. I was coming with the proof that there would be no single scapegoat. The settlement conference took place in a windowless room, at my attorney's office, 3 weeks after the wedding. By then, I had stopped thinking of the evidence as separate discoveries. I arranged everything into one timeline that showed what each person knew, what each person did, and what happened to the money afterward. The first column contained the returned hotel payment from Wednesday. The second showed my card charge clearing Thursday morning. The third showed Nathan's same-day wire reaching our parents Friday morning. The fourth showed Mark submitting the lender cure payment that afternoon. Beside those transactions, I placed the emails about keeping me away from Nathan, the banquet order changing my meal, and the screenshots Vanessa and Linda had voluntarily sent while trying to blame each other. At the bottom was a recovery table prepared by my attorney. It capped what I could receive at one principal amount, the actual interest charged to my card, and the legal fees negotiated through settlement. No matter how many people had participated, I was not collecting $38,600 3 times. I wanted repayment. I also wanted the financial doors between my family and me permanently closed. Anything beyond that would have turned justice into punishment for its own sake. Vanessa arrived first with an attorney. She wore a navy dress and carried a leather folder as if she were attending a business meeting instead of explaining why she had publicly humiliated the woman who saved her wedding. She did not look at me when she sat down. Linda and Mark came together, but chose chairs with an empty seat between them. Linda placed her purse on that seat, creating a physical boundary before anyone spoke. Mark carried the lender documents in a plain envelope and kept both hands over it. Nathan arrived last. He sat beside neither me nor our parents. His purpose was limited. He had sent the wire, and he had signed a written direction, confirming that any recovery of that principal from Linda and Mark should be paid to me. He had also waived any right to pursue them for the same amount after I received it. My attorney began by stating that the meeting was voluntary and civil. No one was being questioned by police. No one was being threatened with arrest. If the settlement failed, the parties could pursue or defend separate claims through the appropriate legal process. Linda glanced at me, as if she had expected a more dramatic performance. My attorney distributed copies of the 3 written timelines. Vanessa says Linda assured her that Nathan's reimbursement would reach Dana after the wedding, she said. Linda says Vanessa described Dana's payment as voluntary family assistance. Mark says he did not understand that Nathan's wire was intended to reimburse Dana. Mark shifted in his chair. My attorney continued. Those statements cannot all be accurate. Vanessa's attorney asked that we review the objective records before assigning intent. That was exactly what I wanted. The hotel's first payment had been returned on Wednesday. Vanessa called me that afternoon and asked me to pay the remaining balance. On Thursday morning, I paid the hotel directly. My message stated that the money was in advance and had to be repaid by Monday. Vanessa agreed in writing. On Friday morning, Nathan sent a same-day wire to Linda and Mark. The amount matched my charge exactly. The memo identified it as a wedding balance reimbursement. Mark sent that money to the mortgage servicer later the same day. Nathan spoke only when my attorney asked him to confirm the transfer. I believed my parents had covered the hotel, he said. Vanessa gave me their account information. I sent the money to replace what I thought they had advanced. I did not know Dana had paid the hotel until the reception. Linda leaned toward him. We intended to make Dana whole. You spent the money before you told her it existed, Nathan replied. My attorney placed his signed direction beside the wire confirmation. The principal is not being returned to Nathan because his documented intention was to reimburse Dana. Once Dana receives the principal, Nathan cannot recover the same amount separately. That removed the argument Linda had been preparing. She could not claim the dispute belonged only between her and her son, and I could not collect from both of them for the same loss. We moved to the wedding records. The banquet event order showed that I had originally been assigned the same entree as the rest of the family table. Vanessa requested the vendor meal Friday afternoon. When the coordinator asked whether it was an error, Vanessa confirmed that it was a family joke. Vanessa sat straighter. It was supposed to be teasing. Dana had criticized every financial decision we made. You told the ballroom she had contributed nothing, Nathan said. I was angry. You planned the meal before you picked up the microphone, Linda interrupted. I did not tell her what to serve. She made that decision herself. Vanessa turned toward her. You said Dana needed to be laughed at before she started another money lecture. I said everyone needed a lighter atmosphere. You told me no one would believe her if she looked jealous. My attorney raised one hand, and the room quieted. She placed the email thread on the table. Linda had written that I should not be allowed to corner Nathan before the reception. Vanessa had replied that she would keep me away from him. Later, after Nathan's wire arrived, Linda wrote that everything could be settled after the weekend. Then came the screenshots each woman had provided. Vanessa had sent Linda's message, predicting that I would eventually help the family again. Linda had sent Vanessa's messages about making the wedding look more expensive than her cousin's, and ensuring that no one believed I had funded anything. They had intended those records to transfer blame. Together, they proved cooperation. Mark pushed the envelope of lender documents toward the center. I did not know about the meal. No one has said you did, I replied. Your responsibility concerns the money. He looked relieved for half a second. Then, my attorney displayed the message he had sent Linda after the wire arrived. Dana will be angry, but she always comes around. Mark's relief disappeared. The 3 settlement packets were placed on the table. Linda's packet acknowledged a joint obligation with Mark for one capped principal amount. It required cooperation with listing the cabin and directing enough proceeds through closing escrow to satisfy the principal. Mark's packet carried the same joint principal obligation. It also required complete disclosure of the lender documents and cooperation with the sale. The agreement stated twice that I would receive only one principal recovery in total. Vanessa's packet did not charge her the principal again. It required payment of the actual interest on my card and an agreed portion of the legal costs caused by her broken promise and concealment. It also required preservation and disclosure of the relevant wedding communications. Linda picked up her packet but did not open it. You prepared different deals for all of us. Different conduct creates different obligations, I said. Vanessa stared at the packet in front of her. I gave you evidence against Linda. That should matter. It matters to the timeline. It does not erase what you did. Mark looked at me. I gave you the lender statement. And it proved you knew the cure payment was not the end. They had each expected to become the helpful witness, while someone else became the villain. I refused to give any of them that escape. Linda turned sharply toward Vanessa. Whose idea was the vendor meal? Vanessa laughed without humor. Who told me Dana had to be laughed at before she asked where the money went? Mark's hand struck the table hard enough to shake the water glasses. Both of you knew what the wire was for. The room went silent. He seemed to realize only after speaking that he had included himself in the truth. The 3 of them were no longer presenting separate defenses. They were accusing one another with facts that fit the same timeline. My attorney closed the evidence folder. The final proof had not forced their alliance apart. Their own fear had done it. Vanessa broke first. She opened her folder and pushed several screenshots across the table. Linda called Dana controlling long before the wedding. She said Nathan would never build a real marriage while his sister still had this much influence over him. Linda gave a sharp laugh. You agreed with every word. I was trying to get along with my future mother-in-law. You were trying to replace Dana. Vanessa turned toward Nathan. Your mother told me Dana needed to be put in her place. She said if Dana looked jealous and bitter at the reception, no one would listen when she started asking about the money. The screenshot supported part of what she said. Linda had warned that I would confront Nathan and ruin the reception if Vanessa did not keep me occupied. But Vanessa had answered that she knew exactly how to handle me. Linda pulled a printed email from her purse. Vanessa chose the meal, she said, not me. The venue email showed Vanessa rejecting the coordinator's concern and confirming that the vendor plate was intentional. Another message showed her describing my scheduled toast as a risk because Nathan still listened to me about financial decisions. You wanted to isolate him, Linda said. You were afraid Dana would make him cancel the upgrades. Vanessa stared at her. You wanted the same thing because you needed his wire. Neither woman could continue calling the humiliation a harmless joke. One had encouraged the story that I was controlling. The other had designed the public performance that made the story believable. Mark tried to separate himself from both of them. I had nothing to do with what happened in the ballroom, he said. I did not know about the meal or the speech. I believe you did not plan the meal, I said. That does not erase what you did with the money. He repeated that Linda had made the decision to use Nathan's wire. My attorney placed the text thread from his phone in front of him. Mark had asked whether I knew where the money was going. Linda replied that Vanessa would keep me from Nathan until after the reception. Mark's answer appeared beneath hers. Dana will be angry, but she always comes around. He read his own words and lowered his eyes. I knew she had not been repaid, he admitted. I knew Nathan believed the wire was replacing the hotel payment. I submitted the lender payment because the deadline was that afternoon. He had not been bullied into silence. He had made a calculation. Protecting the house mattered more to him than my consent, because he believed my anger would eventually expire. Nathan had remained quiet through most of the meeting. When Mark finished, my brother stood and faced Vanessa. I filed for divorce yesterday, he said. Vanessa's face went still. You said you were only considering it. I was considering it until you refused to disclose your debts unless I promised to hide them from Dana and my attorney. This is our marriage. She should not be involved. She became involved when you used her credit to pay for our wedding. Vanessa looked at me, as though I had made the decision for him. Nathan did not allow her to redirect it. You did not need my sister's money, he said. You needed her silence. I did not feel victorious when he said it. A divorce was not a prize I had won. It was the consequence of choices Nathan had finally examined for himself. My attorney returned everyone's attention to the settlement. Linda and Mark would list the cabin within 10 days. They would sign an irrevocable direction authorizing the title company to pay $38,600 to me from the net proceeds at closing. The agreement did not pretend I already had a lien. If they refused to list the property, blocked a reasonable sale, or attempted to divert the proceeds, I could continue the civil claim. The payment would satisfy the principal once. Nathan had already signed away any separate recovery of that same amount after I received it. Vanessa would pay the actual interest charged to my card and $2,500 toward the legal costs created by her broken promise and concealment. Her attorney had provided enough financial information to show that she could make a lump sum payment without pretending she had no resources. No one was being charged 3 times. No one was losing more than the harm they had caused and the expenses required to correct it. Mark signed first. Vanessa read every page, whispered with her attorney, and signed next. Her cooperation against Linda had not purchased forgiveness, but it had prevented her from continuing to deny the evidence. Linda left her packet untouched. You are taking our cabin over money, she said. No, I replied. You chose the cabin when you spent money that was supposed to come back to me. That place belongs to this family. So did the trust you used to take the money. She looked toward Mark, but he kept his hands folded. Then she looked at Nathan, waiting for him to ask me to compromise. Nathan slid the packet back toward her. Sign it. Linda's expression changed when she realized no one would rescue her from the decision. She picked up the pen and wrote her name. 3 signatures sat beneath 3 different versions of the same betrayal. They did not restore the family we had been before the wedding. They only ended the rule that allowed everyone else's emergency to become my obligation. The cabin did not sell quickly enough for Linda's liking. My parents listed it within the 10 days required by the settlement, but the first buyer withdrew after the inspection found moisture damage near the back deck. Linda called my attorney and complained that the inspection had been exaggerated. My attorney reminded her that the sale had to proceed through a licensed realtor and title company, not through a private arrangement designed to protect a price my parents preferred. A second offer arrived several weeks later. It was lower than Linda wanted, but high enough to cover the selling expenses and the principal owed to me. Mark accepted it. Linda delayed for 3 days before signing. The closing took place near the end of May, more than 5 months after the wedding. I did not attend. I did not need to stand in the title office and watch my parents sign away the cabin. The settlement already contained an irrevocable direction requiring the title company to send the agreed amount directly from the net proceeds. 2 business days after closing, $38,600 appeared in my account. Vanessa had already paid the card interest and the agreed portion of my legal expenses. Her attorney sent the final installment confirmation without a personal message from her. I paid the remaining credit card balance that afternoon. The account screen changed to 0, but the moment felt quieter than I had imagined. There was no music, no applause, and no ballroom full of people discovering that I had been right. I downloaded the closing statement, the final settlement receipts, and the zero balance confirmation. Then I placed them in the same folder as the voicemail, the hotel invoice, Nathan's wire, the 3 written timelines, and the signed agreements. For months, that folder had felt like a second job. Every document inside it represented a lie I had needed to disprove, or a promise I had needed to enforce. I closed it and moved it into long-term storage. The money was back where it belonged. I no longer needed to organize my life around recovering it. Selling the cabin did not solve my parents' larger financial problem. The home equity loan still had a substantial balance due when it matured in the spring, and the cure payment had only delayed the consequences. I learned they were selling the main house when the public listing appeared online. A few hours later, Linda called me. She did not begin with an apology. She asked me to review the sales contract. "Your father does not understand half of these clauses," she said. "You are better at this." Before the wedding, that sentence would have activated something automatic in me. I would have opened my laptop, rearranged my evening, and told myself I was helping because I was capable, not because I had been trained to respond whenever the family produced an emergency. This time I said, "You need to ask your realtor or your attorney. They charge for every conversation." "Yes, you could look at it in 20 minutes. I probably could. I am still not doing it." She accused me of punishing them after I had already received my money. "The settlement repaid a debt," I said. "It did not purchase access to me." She told me the new place they were considering was less than half the size of the house where Nathan and I had grown up. There would be no formal dining room, no large yard, and no space for the holiday gatherings she had hosted for years. I did not remind her that she had once valued those rooms more than my consent. I did not need to win the argument again. "I hope the move goes smoothly," I said, "but I will not manage it." My parents hired their own attorney. They sold the Corvette soon afterward and moved into a smaller townhouse outside Columbus. I knew those facts because Linda told me during 2 brief calls, and because the house and car listings were public. I did not pretend to know what they said to each other after the doors closed. I only knew they had finally been forced to handle the financial consequences they had tried to transfer to me. Nathan continued handling his own consequences too. We began meeting for lunch about twice a month. At first, our conversations were awkward. He wanted to apologize every time my card, the wedding, or our parents came up. I told him I did not need a permanent confession. I needed different behavior. He began showing me that behavior in small ways. He found his own divorce attorney. He gathered the financial disclosures without asking me to organize them. He explained the truth to relatives who had attended the wedding, instead of asking me to defend myself. When someone repeated Vanessa's claim that I had ruined the reception, Nathan corrected them. "My sister paid the hotel," he told them. "I reimbursed the wrong people because I did not verify anything. Vanessa lied, and our parents used the money. Dana exposed it. She did not create it." By early August, the property settlement between Nathan and Vanessa was nearly complete. The final hearing still had to be scheduled, and he never described himself as divorced before the court process was finished. They had no children, so there was no custody dispute. Their arguments centered on wedding debt, personal accounts, and what each of them had failed to disclose. Nathan told me those details during lunch because they affected him, not because he wanted me to solve them. Once, he placed a document folder beside his plate and asked, "Would you mind explaining one clause after my lawyer responds, or would you rather stay out of it?" The question mattered more than the document. "You can send me that one clause after your lawyer gives you an answer," I said. He nodded. He did not push the folder toward me. He did not turn his urgency into my obligation. That was how we began becoming brother and sister again, instead of one person creating problems and the other person cleaning them up. Vanessa sent me one final email in June. She said clients and relatives still asked why her wedding photographs had disappeared from social media. She wanted me to publish a statement saying the situation had been a private financial misunderstanding that became emotional during the reception. She promised she would not criticize me again if I helped her close that chapter. I replied once. I will not post anything further about you. I will also not make a false statement to protect your reputation. She did not respond. I kept my promise. I did not upload the voicemail, contact her clients, or encourage strangers to attack her online. Vanessa lost her marriage and the alliance she had built with my parents because of her own choices. I did not need to enlarge the punishment to prove that I had power. The last test came a few days before the 4th of July. Linda called and said the townhouse was too small to host the family barbecue. She told me several relatives were expecting the usual gathering and asked me to arrange it at a park or rent a larger space. The request was presented as though the previous 7 months had been a temporary disagreement, and I had now returned to my assigned position. I already have plans, I said. You could invite everyone. I am not organizing the family barbecue. Then what are we supposed to do? I looked through my kitchen window at the small patio behind my apartment building. Nathan had offered to bring drinks. My aunt was making potato salad. 2 friends from work were bringing their children, and I had already bought enough food for the people I had invited. You will decide what works for you, I said. Linda called me selfish. She said families survived by helping one another, and that I was using boundaries as an excuse to abandon people. I am willing to help people who ask honestly and respect my answer, I told her. I am no longer available to rescue anyone from a decision they made without me. I ended the call before she could turn the conversation into another trial of my character. On the 4th of July, the air was warm and heavy, and the sound of distant fireworks began before sunset. We set folding chairs around the patio and ate from paper plates. No one compared the food, questioned what I had spent, or expected me to solve a crisis before dessert. Nathan arrived on time and brought exactly what he had promised. He asked before moving anything in my kitchen. It was a small gesture, but after everything that had happened, I noticed it. My phone lit up while we were eating. Linda had called twice. Mark had called once. There was also a message saying their grill would not start and asking whether I knew what they should do. Months earlier, I would have searched for a repair video, called the manufacturer, or driven across town with tools I did not own. I would have told myself it was easier to fix the problem than endure their disappointment. I turned the phone face down and returned to the conversation at my table. I did not feel happy that my parents had lost the cabin, the house, or the image they had worked so hard to protect. I did not feel happy that Nathan's marriage had ended before it truly began. What I felt was lighter. I had once imagined revenge as the moment my family finally admitted that I had been right. I thought satisfaction would come from hearing them apologize in the exact words I deserved. Some of them never did. Linda still believed I had overreacted. Mark still described his choices as mistakes rather than decisions. Vanessa still considered herself the victim of a private conflict made public. Their agreement was no longer required. I had my money back. I had my records. I had a relationship with Nathan that now included consent and responsibility. Most importantly, I had learned that being capable did not make me available for exploitation. I was still a daughter. I was still a sister. But I was no longer the family credit card, unpaid attorney, emergency manager, or container for consequences no one else wanted to carry. My phone remained face down as fireworks opened above the buildings and the people around my table continued laughing. For the first time in my life, their emergency stayed theirs. When your family repeatedly turns your kindness into an obligation, you must stop rescuing them without clear limits. Helping once does not give anyone permanent access to your money, time, credit, or emotional labor. Ask questions, keep written records, confirm agreements, and never let guilt replace consent. You can love your relatives while still requiring honesty, repayment, and responsibility. Boundaries are not punishment. They are protection against the same harm happening again. The right decision may disappoint people who benefited from your silence, but it can restore your self-respect. Subscribe for more family stories about truth, accountability, and hard-earned justice.